We will now move to question time, and I'll call Senator Duniam.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, Senator Watt. And I refer the Minister to an answer he gave in question time last Thursday when he suggested that one of Australia's most respected business advocacy groups was the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry was misleading its members and was wrong. Has the Minister himself reached out to ACCI in order to address the issues outlined in question time?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Duniam. Well, hasn't it been a bad weekend to be a Liberal? It's been a bad weekend to be a Liberal. We've had the Victorian election result, all those claims about 15 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Duniam.
Madam President.
Sorry, Senator Duniam. I can't hear you for the noise in the chamber.
I can't hear you, President. President, a point of order on relevance, and I appreciate Senator Watt's observing of weekend's events. I had a question about a question he answered last Thursday.
Yes, I will direct the minister to the question. Please move to the question. Thank you, Senator Watt.
Thank you, President. I have not, as the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries, Forestry and Emergency Management, I will admit that speaking to ACCI has not been my highest priority because we have other ministers who have direct contact with them. But what I will say is that I've been having a lot of contact with stakeholders in my portfolio lately, and one of the things that they keep saying to me is that they are incredibly relieved to finally have a government that is prepared to listen to them, that is prepared to actually get out there and listen to them on issues like agriculture, fisheries, forestry and emergency management, rather than National Party or Liberal Party ministers that used to walk in, lecture them and tell them how things were going to be without actually listening. So I'm very happy to talk about the relationships I've got with stakeholders in my portfolios. But as I was saying, it has been a bad weekend to be a Liberal, especially in Victoria. I don't know how Senator Henderson must be feeling after all the carry-on that we saw from Senator Henderson in the weeks leading up to the election. But it wasn't just the Victorian election that made it a bad weekend to be a Liberal. We had more revelations about former Prime Minister Scott Morrison and all those tricks he played.
Senator Watt, you have drifted, and I would draw your attention back to the question. Thank you, Senator Watt.
Thank you, President. I respect your ruling. I thought I had addressed the question by talking about the fact that I'd been concentrating speaking to stakeholders in my portfolios rather than stakeholders in other portfolios. But what is probably going to be hardest for the Liberal Party to accept this week is that the decade of low wages that they presided over is finally at an end. Finally at an end, because we have reached agreement with Senator David Pocock as to our policies about industrial relations, and they are going to get wages moving again, something that we know certain employer groups don't want to support, and we certainly know the Liberal Party doesn't want to support. But those days are over. Wages are going to get moving again, and that's going to be good for business too.
Expired. Senator Duniam, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Let's try and come back to what I was asking about, and I refer again to the Minister's answer of last Thursday, where he queried, and I quote, "So are ACCI telling us they're opposed to a wage rise?" followed by a sarcastic comment where he said, "Oh, shock horror." Does the Minister agree that it's extraordinary for a Cabinet Minister to so petulantly attack a key stakeholder about their concerns about job creation?
Minister.
Thank you, President. Well, I don't think it would be any surprise to anyone that one of Australia's largest employer groups would not be particularly keen on reforms to an industrial relations system which offers workers the chance of a pay rise. We know that a lot of employer groups supported the former government's industrial relations legislation, and that's okay. They're entitled to their view. It would hardly be surprising that the union movement is supportive of laws being changed so that workers can actually get a pay rise. So we are totally unapologetic about the fact that we are bringing in laws that will bring to an end the decade of deliberate low wage growth that was at the centre of the former government's economic policy. We understand there will be some people who won't be happy about it. We understand there will be millions of workers in Australia who will be very happy about the fact that we finally have a government that is prepared to put their interests first and give them the pay rise that they've been waiting for over a decade to enjoy.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Duniam, second supplementary.
Thanks, President. Given the Minister's just confirmed that that's his intent and what he said, will the Minister now apologise to ACCI and to its members for his anti-employer and anti-job creator rant last week?
Right. Minister.
Thank you, President. Well, if there's one group of people who should be apologising when it comes to industrial relations, it's the Liberal Party of Australia. They should be apologising for the decade of low wage growth that they forced upon every single working Australian in this country. They should also apologise for the low productivity that was delivered to business as a result of their conflict-driven, anti-agreement policies that actually hurt the interests of workers and businesses. I predict this week is going to be the week where the full reality of the federal election defeat is going to finally hit home with the Liberal Party. They are finally waking up to the fact that their decade of low wages is coming to an end because they lost the election, and they lost it to a government that had a central platform of getting wages moving again. We are going to deliver on the mandate that we received from the Australian people to get wages moving again. I know it's going to be very, very hard for the Liberal Party, especially those from the state of Victoria after the weekend they had, but every worker is counting on us delivering this, and we're going to do it.
Thank you, Minister Watt. Senator Sheldon.
My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. The Albanese Labor government went to the federal election with a commitment to get wages moving after a decade of neglect by the Liberals and Nationals. How will the government's industrial relations policy agenda benefit Australian workers?
Senator Wong.
Thank you, President, and thank you to Senator Sheldon for the question, and thank you and many on this side for their continued commitment to ensuring Australian workers get a decent share. Both before they were in the parliament and subsequently. And unlike those opposite, we have a different view about the importance of getting wages moving again. Because the reality is, as Senator Sheldon outlined in his question, Australia had a government for 10 years for whom low wages were a deliberate design feature of the Australian economy. A deliberate design feature of the Australian economy. And they've never resolved from that. They didn't resolve from it in the federal election campaign, where they opposed a dollar wage increase. They don't resolve from it now. They continue to argue that ensuring that Australian workers get a decent share of the economic benefits that this nation produces is somehow a disaster for the Australian economy. Well, we on this side have a different view, and so too do so many working people across Australia. And with our IR policy and legislation, we are making a choice to end the era of deliberate wage stagnation, a choice to get wages moving again, obviously also a choice to work to close the gender pay gap, to take long overdue steps to put gender equity at the heart of our workplace laws, a choice to improve job security, and a choice to wind up those institutions established with nothing more than a political agenda to promote conflict. It is a bill that will help. It is a bill and a policy agenda that will help real people, workers across this country, or for too long who have paid the price of the coalition's view that we weren't allowed to get wages moving again in this country.
Senator Sheldon's first supplementary.
Can the Minister outline how the government's industrial relations policy agenda will benefit Australian businesses?
Minister.
Those on the other side to try and distract attention from the fact that they actually don't want wages to increase, as demonstrated by the last 10 years, have focused a lot on small business and a lot on a scare campaign, which Senator Watt has very effectively shot down in this chamber. I would remind those opposite that rates of bargaining for small businesses have dropped by over 60% between 2010 and this year. That is under you. So, unlike you, we think it's a good thing to support small business participating in bargaining if they want to. Why? Because bargaining can help make a business more productive and flexible. That's why we have the Cooperative Workplaces bargaining stream, which is especially relevant to small business. It ensures that business can opt into relevant agreements negotiated by their industry association. And, of course, we will provide funding to the Fair Work Commission to provide small business bargaining support. You pretend to be the friends of small business,
time has
but are
expired.
you?
Senator McDonald. Senator McDonald. Order. I have a senator on her feet.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister.
Sorry, Senator McDonald. I'm way ahead of myself. No wonder you all look confused. Sorry, Senator Sheldon. Second supplementary.
Thank you. Can the Minister outline how the government's industrial relations policy agenda will benefit the Australian economy?
Thank you, Minister.
The policy, our legislation and our approach makes gender equity an objective of the Fair Work Act, bans pay secrecy clauses in employment contracts, creates two expert panels in the Commission to deal with pay equity and the care and community sector, ensures employers have a duty to prevent sexual harassment, makes the sexual harassment dispute process fairer and more effective, empowers the Fair Work Commission to settle disputes over flexible work requests by arbitration if necessary, and prohibits advertising jobs at below legal minimum wages, and importantly, does what 18 out of 26 OECD countries does, which is to prioritise multi-employer bargaining. You know, those opposites seem to think that the sky will fall down. You're behind the OECD, and the reason that so many of our competitor economies are going down this path is because it's good for productivity and it's good for cooperation. We want to get wages moving again. You are stuck in the 10 years of wage stagnation.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator McDonald.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, I refer to the Prime Minister's comments on the 2nd of September 2022. When asked if there would be a new mining tax, he said, and I quote, "No, that's not on the agenda." Minister, can you guarantee Labor will not implement any new mining tax?
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President, and I thank the senator for the question. And I don't recall specifically, or I don't know everything the Prime Minister said going back to the 2nd of September, but I know he has been consistent in his language in that regard. I have not heard, that is what he's been saying. That is certainly the position of the government. But we are, can I just say, we are a mature and responsible government that's dealing with a very, very significant increases in prices for energy and an energy system that is creaking and collapsing under the weight of a decade of inaction from those opposite. 22 failed energy policies, never landed one of them. The power was going to go out. The power was going to go out pretty much the day we took office. Since then, we've had supply shortages, we've got cost escalation. We had the member for Hume who hid an increase in prices. So we are dealing and trying to clean up the complete and total shambles that we inherited.
Senator.
I answered the
Minister,
question.
Senator McDonald.
Thank you. It is to relevance. I specifically asked, can she guarantee there will be no mining tax?
The Minister is being relevant to your question. Thank you, Senator McDonald. Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. And I did answer the question up front. The government has no plans for a mining tax. The Prime Minister has been very clear on that. The Treasurer has been clear on that. But I am further to my question, further to the information for the information of those opposite. The government is in this area, in the area of energy, which I think has been linked to questions around tax increases. We are cleaning up a complete and total mess that you left us. That's the reality. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. That's the work that we are doing, and we will continue to do whilst we hold the office of while we were in government.
Your time has expired. Senator McDonald, first supplementary.
Minister, I refer to revelations on the 11th of November 2022 that your cabinet was considering implementing a mining tax. Does this mean the Prime Minister is considering breaking this promise?
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Minister.
Thank you. Well, I don't know where that comment has come from, and I don't speak about matters that are being discussed in Cabinet, but I refer you to my previous answer that I just gave you around the Prime Minister and his commitments. And we are not a government that breaks promises. So as hard... Order.
Order. Order. I'm waiting for quiet so I can call the minister back to answer her question. Minister.
Thank you. We deliver on our commitments. We deliver on our promises. It's why we've delivered an increase in the minimum wage. It's why we've held the Jobs and Skills Summit. It's why we're cleaning up the aged care mess. It's why we passed the Climate Change Bill. It's why we're debating the National Anti-Corruption Commission legislation later this week. It's why we passed laws for cheaper childcare. It's why the budget had making medicines cheaper. It's why we passed paid domestic and family violence leave, because we are a government that delivers on our commitments, every single one of them.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator McDonald, second supplementary.
Well, Minister, it looks like Labor looks like it's broken its promise on ruling out a mining tax. Labor has broken its promise on a $275 cut in electricity prices. Labor has broken its promise on multi-employer bargaining. How many more promises will you break?
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Minister.
Thank you. We're a government that keeps all of our commitments, and as I'll continue to go through them, You are wrong. You are wrong in the assertion in your question. It's simply wrong. We have abolished the cashless debit card. We've started the work on an Indigenous voice to Parliament. We've got the plan for an end of violence against women. We're investing in the NBN. We've got the Women's Economic Equality Task Force. We have not stopped. Every single day we come to work is to implement the commitments we took to the Australian people, to make Australia a better place for people and to fix up the mess, the destruction, the disarray, and build back the trust in government after 9 years of your systemic failures in almost every single area of government responsibility.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Communications, Senator Watt. Following the result of the Victorian election and the disgraceful performance of sections of the Murdoch media, will the government now act on the issue of media diversity in Australia and, in particular, its importance for a robust democracy?
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Minister Watt.
Yes, this one. Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Well, I do think that the Victorian election showed that there were a number of commentators on the state of Victorian politics who got it completely wrong. Some of them are sitting in every aisle opposite us. Some of them are sitting in certain media outlets in Victoria who waged a 4-year campaign against the Andrews government, promoting hysteria, promoting conspiracy theories, with the people who are the noisiest now. Yeah, we do live in a free country, and you know what? Some people are free to get it wrong. And you have got it wrong year after year after year about the issues that the Victorian people were concerned about. Now, Senator Hanson-Young, as you are aware, our government does have a position of supporting diverse media ownership. I'm sure that the minister responsible has discussed these matters with you. But I do think, in general terms, that the Victorian state election again showed that some media outlets, along with some members of parliament, actually need to get out in the real world and listen to what real people have to say about these issues, rather than just occupying their own echo chamber. We have seen some members of the Liberal and National parties, federally and Victoria, operate very closely with some of those media outlets, and what they demonstrated was that they were grossly out of touch with people in Victoria, just as they have demonstrated that in the recent federal election and in a range of other elections as well. So I do hope that the Victorian state election is a very big wake-up call for a number of media outlets, as it should be also for members on the other side. Otherwise, they're going to keep drifting down the out-of-touch path that they seem to be intent on taking.
Senator Hanson-Young, first supplementary.
Thank you. Does the minister agree that sections of the Murdoch media were in fact in breach of their own Australian Press Council rules, which state that the media should, quote, ensure that factual material in news reports and elsewhere is accurate and not misleading and is distinguishable from other sources such as opinion?
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Minister.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Hanson-Young. Of course, we believe that it's important for all media outlets to separate what is fact from opinion, and it is an important role for the media to make sure that when they are reporting what are supposed to be facts, that they do demonstrate the facts and do put out the facts. And then when they want to have something to say in an opinion piece, then go for your life. But there shouldn't be a blurring of the two. And unfortunately, we have seen occasions where that distinction has been blurred. I think that's not in the interests of the media in Australia, and I don't think it's in the interests of good public commentary about debate. Now, it's not really for me, as a representing minister, to judge whether particular outlets may have breached media codes, but I would say very strongly to all media outlets, no matter who they are, that the public expects that media codes will be followed, that factual information will be presented in a non-opinion form, leaving opinion pieces for their rightful place in our democracy, but not blurring it with fact.
Your time has expired. Senator Hanson-Young, second supplementary.
Given the Press Council clearly cannot enforce its own standards, Australian media is more concentrated than any other comparable market, and the overt political role that some sections of the Murdoch media play, will the government hold an inquiry with the powers of a Royal Commission into media diversity, including the Murdoch press, as recommended by some of your own senators, a former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, and some of your own Labor branches?
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. As I was saying in my original answer, the Albanese government does support a diverse and sustainable media sector, and we recognise that quality news and public interest journalism plays an important role in the functioning of Australian society and democracy. It is essential to informing local communities. Labor has long acknowledged and voiced concerns about the level of media concentration in Australia, which is why the Albanese Labor government is focused on supporting and fostering diversity in our media. It's also why the government has affirmed a clear position that a Royal Commission or judicial inquiry into media concentration is not the way forward for media policy. There have already been multiple reviews and inquiries into the media and public interest journalism over the past decade, yet the recommendations from these processes have not been properly addressed. Rather than holding another inquiry, we need to be outcomes-focused in implementing the backlog of recommendations that already exist.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher. Can the Minister please inform the Senate how the government's policy settings in workplace relations and gender equality are benefiting Australian women?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for her question and for her years of representing low-paid workers, in particular women, through her service through the Labor movement, through the union movement. This government is committed to gender equality, not as an afterthought because we have a women problem, but because we understand gender equality as a core economic imperative that benefits all of us. And this government recognises that there are structural challenges to achieving gender equality that need structural responses. There's been a decade of ignoring these structural barriers to gender equality, and women have been bearing the cost, including through lower pay, poor conditions and chronic labour shortages in feminised sectors. So we're getting on the job of fixing this through our workplace relations settings, investments in cheaper childcare and modernising PPL schemes, and through reforms to close the gender pay gap and investments to end violence against women. These are the structural reforms to fix the systems that are not working right or that are not working in the interests of women. We're putting gender equality at the centre of workplace relations by making gender equality and job security objects of the Fair Work Act and strengthening access to flexible working arrangements. We will also establish a pay equity expert panel and a care and community sector expert panel in the Fair Work Commission. We will increase pay transparency by providing pay secrecy prohibiting pay secrecy clauses and strengthening gender pay gap reporting. We will prohibit sexual harassment under the Fair Work Act, a recommendation of the Respect at Work report, which we are implementing in full. While our workplace relations reforms will lift women's wages, our investment in cheaper childcare will make early childhood education and care more accessible, and our PPL reforms will give families more choice when caring for their youngest family members.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Can the minister update the Senate on how these policy settings will drive wages growth with women in low-paid, feminised industries?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister.
Thank you, President. These important reforms will provide greater access to bargaining for workers in lower paid and highly feminised sectors. Workers like Jane. Jane, who's been an early childhood educator for 40 years. She works at East Brunswick Kindergarten and Childcare. Incredibly passionate about her job, but it's been a tough industry to dedicate her life and her career to. There are constant struggles with staffing shortages due to low wages and conditions in the sector. Jane and her staff, along with workers in 70 other centres in Victoria, benefit from being part of a multi-employer agreement. They've won wages increases of 15% to 18% above the award, and just as important, they've won things like more time for planning and professional development, which delivers better quality care for the children that they are providing care to. But the process is currently drowning in red tape, and it shouldn't be that hard. Directors in these centres are usually educators, they're not workplace relations or HR professionals, and we're making it easier for people like Jane to get better pay.
Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Can the minister please update the Senate on why this policy agenda is so critical to improving conditions that will benefit women?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thanks, Senator Walsh, for the question. Achieving economic equality for women requires reforms to improve working conditions as well as pay. And we are amending the Fair Work Act to provide stronger access to flexible working arrangements. Women are twice as likely as men to request flexible work arrangements, but the reform is not just important for women. This will help families to share those work and caring responsibilities, which is critical to driving gender equality. Currently, an employee can ask for flexible work arrangements, but if their employer says no, they've got nowhere to go. The reforms that we're looking at will bring employers and employees together in workplaces in the first instance to resolve requests and gives the Fair Work Commission the power to resolve the dispute if needed. In addition, we're prohibiting sexual harassment under the Fair Work Act. This complements reforms to the Sex Discrimination Act, which passed in this place last Friday. Along with implementation of paid family and domestic violence leave, our reforms will make workplaces safer and more flexible for women.
Your time has expired. Senator Hanson.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change Energy, Senator Wong. With the large-scale penetration of renewables into the national grid over the past 20 years, coinciding with energy costs for Australian households and businesses rising by 300% or more over the same period, is the Albanese government telling Australians the truth when it says renewables are cheaper?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank you to Senator Hanson for the question. And yes, we are. And it's not simply our assessment, it's the assessment of those involved in the energy markets, and those assessments are public. And it is the case that the lack of policy certainty over the last decade has meant that we have seen an increase in energy prices, combined with the international circumstances we see, which are well known to everyone in this chamber, including the war on Ukraine and the way in which energy supplies are being utilised as part of that, essentially part of that conflict. Well, Senator Hanson, with respect, it's not simply me saying this. This is what global markets are saying. This is what developed economies around the world are saying. And if you go to Europe and you understand what is occurring in Europe and what is therefore and is occurring in global markets, they are affecting Australia's energy costs, as are being affected around the world. And Senator Rennick, a bit of economic irrationality over there, fair enough. But it's, the reality is the market is not where you are. The market is not where you are. Senator Hanson, we deeply appreciate how difficult the increase in energy costs is for Australian households. Sorry, I don't know how to respond to the interjection from Senator Rennick. Anyway, we understand how difficult it is. The government is very seized of this. I would make the point to you that the irrational position that was in place over so many years under those opposite meant that we saw supply exit the system. And we know if supply exits the system, what happens to price.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Before I call Senator Hanson for her first supplementary, I remind senators on both sides this is crossbench time. They get limited opportunity and interjections are disorderly, and I would appreciate Senator Hanson having the benefit of hearing Minister Wong's responses in quiet. Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
Thank you. Well, Senator Wong, I don't accept your answer to that question. Neither do a lot of Australians, because the war in Ukraine only just started this year and energy costs have been going up for years. My question is, with domestic energy costs predicted to increase by up to 56% over the next 2 years as more renewables come online and more coal-fired plants are closed ahead of time, will the Albanese government apologise to the Australian people for falsely claiming it would reduce household energy bills by $275 per year?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Watt.
Senator Hanson, we are seeking to deal with what is happening in global energy markets and what is happening in the domestic energy markets. And we inherited, as you will recall, a price increase, the policy response to which was simply the former minister, Mr Taylor, hiding a price increase prior to the next election. We inherited a system which saw 4 gigawatts of dispatchable capacity leave the system with only 1 gigawatt coming in. In relation to the point about renewables, the CSIRO, in their report in July 2022, forecast that by 2030, electricity produced by solar PV would be 2/3 cheaper than black coal and over 80% cheaper than nuclear. Wind generation would be 50% cheaper than black coal and 80% cheaper than nuclear. The reason the market has not invested in more coal-fired power is because the market is looking at the same predictions that I have just outlined to you.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
Maybe they're not looking into it because of the government shutting down coal in Australia. Considering that no human being in history has ever led a carbon-neutral existence, will the minister please explain to the Senate and the Australian people how the Albanese government's policies to bring in more than 250,000 immigrants every year are consistent with its policy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030.
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister.
Well, Senator Hanson, we do think that responsible levels of migration are consistent with economic growth, and we also believe that renewables are demonstrably a cheaper energy source than those which I have outlined, so coal and nuclear, which explains market behaviour over this last decade. It is the case we will have to transform our economy and we will have to ensure that we both reduce what we put into the atmosphere and offset that which we cannot reduce. And in that regard, Senator Hanson, the position the Albanese government is putting is where the mainstream economies of the world are. It is where the majority of the global economies are.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Ruston.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister of Health, Senator Gallagher. The distribution priority area classification system has been crucial in supporting the movement of general practitioners to rural, regional, remote areas to address workforce shortages. However, the Albanese government's decision to expand the DPA means that outer metropolitan areas now have the same priority status as rural and remote parts of the country, where critical GP shortages are being felt the hardest. The Rural Doctors Association of Australia has stated that this policy change, and I quote, will cost the lives of rural and remote patients who already suffer poorer health outcomes. Can the minister please explain what advice formed the basis of your government's decision to expand the DPA classifications and whether you consulted with the RDAA, whose members are the ones most impacted by this decision?
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Ruston for the question. I will come back to the chamber on the specifics of the minister's engagement and consultations, but I can say that I know Minister Butler consults very widely and is working very closely with general practice and general practice groups, groups representing particular arms of general practice or healthcare broadly, as he's working through the reforms that we want to implement. On the program around the designated status or distribution priority areas, we have expanded that because there are shortages in a whole range of areas. That's the reality. Like, primary care is under enormous stress, and there are workforce shortages in outer metropolitan areas, in metropolitan areas and in rural and regional areas for sure, which is why there was a response to rural and regional health through the budget in October, which had a specific measure, a rural general practice package, to make sure that there are innovative models of care being trialled across rural general practice, more training placements under the John Flynn program, and looking at extra incentives for doctors and nurses to go into and work in rural and regional areas. So we're looking at this across the board. Yes, there are enormous pressures in rural and regional areas. There are enormous pressures in primary care. You just talk to any GP at the moment and they will tell you how hard it is in terms of workforce, in terms of how they run their businesses, in terms of pressure that we are trying to respond through the Strengthening Medicare Fund, and some of the other responses through the urgent care clinics as well are all designed to assist general practice.
Your time has expired. Senator Ruston, first supplementary.
The Warrumbungle Shire Council has previously stated that your government minister's decision to expand the DPA classifications will likely mean people in rural and remote communities will have to travel hundreds of kilometres to receive medical attention. When asked in budget estimates if the government had consulted first with rural, regional and remote communities before making this decision on DPA's classification, Senator McCarthy said no. Minister, can you confirm that the Albanese government did not consult with these communities before making these decisions?
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister.
Thank you. Well, I've already said I will come back on the specifics of the consultation, but I do know we've got the Strengthening Medicare Task Force. There's a range of consultative mechanisms that the Minister Butler has put in place to deal with the pressures, that we inherited from your term in government. The reality is you don't just have a primary care crisis that happens over 2 months. This has been building for years. The workforce shortages have been building for years. We had an inquiry that Senator Green chaired, I think you chaired it, didn't you, Senator Green, into this specific matter, which made recommendations in order to deal with some of the pressures that experienced under your watch. So there is more to do. There is more to do, but we also have to deal with workforce shortages in other areas of the country as well.
Your time has expired. Senator Ruston, second supplementary.
When asked in question time in the House about the number of rural towns who've lost a GP because of the decision of your government to change the DPA classifications, Minister Butler refused to answer the question. Does Minister Butler know the number of rural towns who have been negatively impacted by this decision? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister.
The decision is about creating additional workforce. That is behind the decision, right? So that these other areas that are having trouble attracting GPs are able to work through that program. So, yes, we accept that there are significant workforce shortages in rural and regional areas. And it's not just GPs, it's in a whole range of health workers. But we also have them in other areas of the country, and we need to respond to that as well. And part of the reason why we are putting in the urgent care clinics, the grants, the $220 million grants programs for GPs so that they're able to put in place supports in their practices to help meet some of the pressures they're seeing, plus some of the other incentive programs, is all designed to come at this from a number of different ways. There is no silver bullet.
Your time has expired. Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister and also the Climate and Environment Ministry, Senator Wong. Today, a report from the Climate Council and Emergency Leaders for Climate Action has reported that the Queensland floods earlier this year cost nearly $8 billion. And extreme weather events over the past year have cost Australian households an average of $1,532. The report says we need deep cuts to emissions this decade to avoid climate catastrophe, something that cannot happen if more coal and gas projects are approved. Rather than propping up coal and gas projects with fossil fuel subsidies, this government should be addressing the cost of living and preparing communities for future disasters. When will the government cancel the $47.2 billion in public money it's giving in subsidies to the fossil fuel sector?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Thank you to Senator Waters for a very lengthy question. Well, it was a lengthy question. That's all right. She's entitled to a full minute, and I'll. They're very touchy, aren't they? They're very touchy. Had a bad Saturday night. Look, Senator, this is a variation on a question that you've asked and your colleagues have asked on a number of occasions. And what I would say to you is, one, we agree with the need to make reductions in the emissions Australia produces. That is a position that I have been arguing and the Labor Party has been arguing for many years. We sought to implement that in government. We fought for that in opposition over 9 years. And I am pleased, as I'm sure many people across Australia are, that we not only have a government who wants to act on climate, but have a parliament that wishes to act on climate. So I think all of those points really go back to some of the points you raise. I think the question is, what is your diagnosis or your assertion about the test to deal with that? We believe the test is as set by the UNFCCC and as agreed amongst the international community, which is economies over time will make reductions in their emissions, what will reduce the emissions they produce. That is why we have an election commitment to a 43% reduction by 2030, which will see the overwhelming majority of energy in the energy sector coming from renewable sources. Now, I appreciate the Greens have a different view. I trust they also have a fiscal position that they're prepared to take, which reflects that. In terms of the revenue to the Australian economy by those sectors. But unlike you, we're not going to target workers and one industry. We are going to reduce over time.
Your time has expired. Senator Waters, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Last week, in a case taken by Youth Verdict, the Land Court of Queensland recommended rejection of Clive Palmer's Waratah Coal Wandoan mine. The Land Court found that the mine's contribution to climate change and cultural harm outweighed any economic benefit. Will the Environment Minister apply the same reasoning when assessing the 114 coal and gas projects currently before her and reject those damaging projects?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister.
Thank you. That's actually a question not in the climate portfolio, as you'd know, but in the environment portfolio, but I'm happy to respond to it. Thank you, Senator Payne. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that. We also don't understanding orders switch portfolios mid-question, but that's fine. I'm happy to take the question. And the response is, as I previously said, Senator Waters, obviously those matters that are before Ms Plibersek or whomever holds that portfolio at any time over the past years, those are matters that the Minister would exercise in accordance with the statutory discretion. as you know, our view is that any project has to stack up environmentally and clearly economically, and I think the reality is over time the global markets will reduce the amount of the consumption from fossil fuels. I think that is demonstrated by a net zero.
Senator Waters, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Given the environmentally, culturally and economically devastating impacts of climate change, particularly for future generations, when will the government commit to introducing a climate trigger into the EPBC Act to require the climate impacts of all large projects to be considered and to allow the outright rejection of big coal, oil and gas projects on climate grounds?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister.
I do agree with the characterisation about the urgency of action on climate, and I believe our country would have been far better off had we first passed the emissions trading scheme, or second, if we had been able to continue the clean energy package that Ms Gillard and Ms Gillard's government introduced. Regrettably, that was not the case, and I think we would have been in a more competitive position than we are now in a global economy which is increasingly prioritising clean energy. But the question again goes to a policy lever that I understand that that those at that end of the chamber have been advocating for. Some have been advocating for in the community. We went to the election with a very clear commitment about how we would reduce Australia's emissions and how we would seek to shift our economy from an emissions intensive.
Senator Ciccone.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, Senator Watt. Minister, how will the Albanese Labor government continue working with the re-elected Andrews Labor government to deliver important infrastructure projects in my home state of Victoria?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President.
Senator Ciccone.
What about the hotel workers?
Senator Ciccone, order.
Thank you, President. And it seems that even after the election, the trigger words are still there. The Andrews Labor government. Trigger. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say Andrews Labor government. I thank the senator for the question. I know that he's a proud Victorian, and I would hazard a guess that he personally voted for the Andrews Labor government on the weekend. Trigger warning. There's lots of references to the Andrews Labor government in this answer. I should really give you a trigger warning. On Saturday, the Victorian community came together and emphatically endorsed the Andrews Labor government and their agenda for Victoria's future. I would like to congratulate Premier Daniel Andrews on his success and the significant achievement of a third time in government. Despite what you may have heard in this place last week, it's clear that the Victorian community has strongly endorsed the work that Premier Daniel Andrews and his team have done to date, as well as the work to be done over the coming years. And this was despite an increasingly desperate and personal scare campaign run by the Liberals and Nationals both in Victoria and in the federal government.
Minister Watt, resume your seat. Order. 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 I have a senator on her feet. Order. Order. Senator Ruston.
Point of order on relevance. I was just wondering whether you might draw the minister's attention to the question.
Thank you. I will remind Senator Watt. He has been broadly relevant, but I'll remind him the question was about infrastructure. Thank you, Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. It's always good to talk about the Andrews Labor government. And of course, the Albanese Labor government will continue to work with the Andrews Labor government on infrastructure projects throughout the state of Victoria. Through the 2022-23 October budget, we've gone line by line through the previous government's mess of an infrastructure portfolio and cleaned it up while making sure we continue to invest in important projects for Victoria's future. We've put an end to the fake financing and ideological obsession with the East-West link, and we're working with the Andrews Labor government to invest in the Barwon Heads Road Upgrade Stage 2, the Ison Road Overpass, the Melbourne Airport Rail Link, the Gippsland Rail Line Upgrade, the Cameron's Land Interchange at Beveridge, and of course the $2.2 billion to the suburban rail loop that will be delivered by an Albanese Labor government and the Andrews Labor government.
Thank you, Senator Watt. Your time has expired. Senator Giacone, first supplementary.
Thank you, President, and I thank the minister for that answer. Minister, how will the federal Labor government work with the Victorian Labor government to deliver important infrastructure projects such as the suburban rail loop?
Thank you, Senator Giacone. Minister Watt.
President, I'm very pleased you asked about the suburban rail loop, which was, of course, a core commitment of the Andrews Labor government, because the suburban rail loop is a once-in-a-generation infrastructure project that will transform how Victorians move around the state. And while some still don't want to accept the reality of defeat after defeat, the Australian government will work with the newly elected Andrews Labor government to honour our election commitment to provide $2.2 billion.
Minister Watt, please resume your seat. Senator Henderson, it is not okay to run a commentary alongside the minister's answer. I would ask you to listen quietly. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. As I say, we will now honour our election commitment to provide $2.2 billion towards the suburban rail loop east, which has been yet again endorsed by Victorians on the weekend. But it's not just urban Victorians who will benefit from this project. Regional Victorians from Gippsland and the Latrobe Valley will benefit hugely from this project, gaining fast access to Monash University, Monash Health, including the Children's Hospital, all without having to go into central Melbourne, saving an hour of travel. This is an important project, and yet again Victorians have endorsed it.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Giacone, second supplementary.
Thank you again, President. Again, I thank the minister. Minister, has the Victorian community expressed a view in relation to the delivery of the suburban rail loop by the state and federal government?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. And in fact, Senator Giacone, it's clear from the results of Saturday night that the people of Victoria have yet again made their view clear on the suburban rail loop. Not once, but twice this year alone. Communities in Melbourne's east have voted emphatically in favour of this project. Whether it's Bayswater, Glen Waverley or Box Hill on Saturday night, or Chisholm and Hotham back in May, local communities have made it clear that they want the delivery of the suburban rail loop. Now, you really would think that the Victorian Liberals would have seen the warning signs after the 2018 election when Victorians backed in the suburban rail loop. But no, it's like a rail line with a big danger ahead sign, and Senator Henderson and her friends just charged on. It happened again in the federal election when a government that took the suburban rail loop to the people was backed in. But again, Senator Henderson, Senator Van, Senator McKenzie couldn't hear the warning signs. And now they've driven the coalition train off the track, a massive derailment. Stop digging. We've got tunnelling machines to dig the holes for the rail line. We don't need you digging, but you will keep doing so.
Your time has expired. Senator Chandler.
Thank you, President.
Order. Order. You have a senator on her feet. Senator Chandler.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Over the last 3 months, the Iranian regime has been accused of killing more than 300 civilians standing up for human rights, particularly Iranian women and girls. The Iranian-Australian community has been calling for weeks for the Australian government to hold the Iranian regime to account. Has the government now applied any targeted sanctions, such as those imposed by like-minded nations? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank you to Senator Chandler for her question. And she and I had a discussion about this in estimates, and I would refer her in terms of the action we have been taking to the answer I gave in the Senate last week. About this issue. We have taken action against Iran. We've consistently called out the regime publicly for its egregious actions, and I think everybody in this place, as much as you might like to play a bit of politics with this, Senator Van, everyone in this place would stand united in our condemnation of the brutal repression of civil and political rights in Iran following the tragic death of Mahsa Amini. So I would make this point. In relation to sanctions, the senator does know that I, nor any foreign minister before me, including Senator Payne, notwithstanding her interjection, have ever speculated publicly on sanctions. Previously, no foreign minister would publicly speculate on sanctions for very good reasons. I understand the calls from the community in Australia. I met with some representatives last week and I said to them, I understand why it is people feel so strongly about this and why people are so angry. And I wish it were a world in which Australia and other like-minded countries such as Canada and the US and New Zealand and many others that we have been working with in the UN context to put pressure on Iran, I wish we could make this better, but we can't. That is the reality. This is a repressive regime. We have to continue to work with other members of the international community to assert clear pressure in that context. We have also made representations directly here.
Senator Chandler, first
Thank you very much,
supplementary.
President. Last week, after cancelling a division on my urgency motion calling on this government to take concrete action against the human rights abuses perpetrated by the Iranian government, both the opposition and the Greens clarified their positions as in favour of the motion. What was the government's position on the motion, in support or against, as Labor senators called out at the time?
Minister.
Thank you. This is going back a few days now. My recollection is that the whip indicated the government's position on that motion. So I'd refer you to Hansard on that. But again, I'm advised that she did. And what I would say is I think we have been very clear about our position in relation to Iran, and I find it disappointing. I find it disappointing that those opposites are playing politics with an issue when we see people being killed because of their actions and their beliefs. Like, I find it extraordinary. And you think that what a procedure in the chamber where there was obviously an issue where an explanation had to be given in relation to a vote, you think that somehow is the main issue? No, you know what the issue is? The issue is the repression of women and men and children in Iran for standing up for their rights. That's the issue.
Senator Chandler, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Hundreds of Iranian Australians, Kurdish Australians and their supporters have been rallying outside the parliament today. Will the government listen to them and take real action to strengthen Australia's response to the abuses in Iran?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Minister.
I'm aware of that protest. I discussed it with members of the community with whom I met last week, and I support their right to protest, and I understand their calls. I do understand their calls. And as I said to members of, as I've said previously to members of the community, I think, if I were in their position, I perfectly understand why they're calling for it. The person who holds this office has to make a range of decisions and go through a range of processes and make a judgment in Australia's best interests. I presume the same judgment as the coalition government raised when Iran was elected to the CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women, and no protest was lodged by the former government.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Marielle Smith.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Gallagher. How are governments working together to meet the continuing health challenges presented by COVID?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Smith for the question. Governments around Australia are monitoring this fourth wave of Omicron very closely. Data released last Friday over the last 7 days suggests that the current wave is likely to peak towards the end of November and into early December. The case numbers are up. They're up 10% in the last 7 days compared with 47% in the 7 days before that and 38% in the 7 days before that. So it's important that people continue to take precautions against COVID, and the best precaution is to be up to date with vaccinations. The Albanese government is working with states and territories through National Cabinet to ensure that we have a strong national response. In the recent budget, we spent, I think, total spending on COVID measures is around $2.6 billion, including funding for the stockpile, vaccines and treatments, and significant investment in aged care. We will continue to work constructively with all states and territory governments because we know that a cooperative, collaborative approach leads to better public health outcomes. Governments working closely with their communities is also vital, and we saw evidence of this in the Victorian election on the weekend. No one has done it tougher during this pandemic than the people in Victoria, and the strong, focused leadership of Premier Daniel Andrews through the pandemic has been endorsed with this extraordinary victory. On the weekend, Victorians voted for a competent government. The strong leadership of Premier Andrews and his government show that during the challenges thrown at Victorians during the pandemic, accepting the public health advice, accepting the evidence, making tough decisions but being honest and upfront and transparent does reward you electorally. The government looks forward to working with the Andrews government and all state and territory governments as we tackle this next wave of COVID-19.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Smith, first supplementary.
Minister, what are we doing to protect older Australians and those in aged care?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister.
Thank you very much, Senator Smith. The budget includes funding to support ongoing measures to protect older Australians. Key measures include $810 million in additional funding into the Aged Care Support Program grant so that aged care providers continue to be supported with the costs of managing COVID-19. $235 million to ensure aged care, primary care, disability care and First Nations health services will continue to have access to a supply of PPE, treatments, rapid antigen tests. Sorry, I can't hardly hear myself.
Senator Wong and Senator Henderson.
Senator Henderson, you've had a tough weekend, we know. We know you have. Take all the time you need. Take all the time you need. The government has been on the front foot to help protect older Australians most at risk of COVID. Our measures to support the aged care sector include pre-deploying summer packs of personal protective equipment to all residential aged care homes, continuing to prioritise boosters and continuing access to surge workforce and additional workers.
Your time has expired. Senator Smith, second supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, what action is the government taking to ensure more Australians have access to antiviral medication to treat COVID?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank Senator Smith for the question. In July this year, the Minister for Health and Aged Care announced the widening of eligibility for antiviral drugs to treat COVID. All Australians aged over 70 who test positive for COVID are now able to access antivirals on the PBS. Access has also been expanded to people over the age of 50 with 2 or more risk factors for severe disease, Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people aged over 30 with 2 or more risk factors for severe disease. The most recent data shows that 394,100 doses of antivirals have been prescribed and dispensed from the PBS. Prescription numbers increased by 11.8% last week compared to the previous week, and approximately 34,130 antiviral prescriptions have been provided to people in residential aged care.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.